So folks, welcome. My name is Tyler Colbourne. I am the professional development consultant here with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers. We're also joined by Brenda Gear, who will get a chance to introduce herself a little bit in the session. But we're here today to talk about decolonizing mental health. Some of you folks might have been registered for the session we had planned to have on September 2nd. Some of you may have registered for the session since then for the new rescheduled date today. Either way, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. It's Friday, October 17th. I don't understand how we're this far along in the year already. I feel like it was January yesterday. I hope all of you have your Christmas trees up if that's how you celebrate, or at least Halloween decorations. I don't know, but it's October. Yeah, I know, Brenda. I love Christmas. Well, I like the Christmas tree anyway. But anyways, we're here for talking about decolonizing mental health. I'm looking forward to our conversation that Brenda and I are going to have with some other speakers who are here in pre-recorded content. This session's a bit of an experiment. We haven't offered a session in this way before, in this format. And I'm with one of my most favorite people in the world, Brenda, who I just really appreciate and I'm grateful to have been able to work with over the last year. So we're gonna get started with the land acknowledgement. And I'm gonna put some links in the chat here before I do that. You're gonna see our college commitment to decolonization and our commitment to reparations for people of African descent, and also a link to this presentation that you're welcome to view on your own. Again, this session is being recorded today, but your names and your presence shouldn't be on the recording as this is a webinar format, but please do engage in the chat. You're also welcome to engage with the Q&A function. We're hoping to have time for questions and answers later in the session. If we don't have time, we'll try to follow up in some other format or other way. But yeah, I'd love to have you engage in the chat. And firstly, would love to hear, who are you? Who's joining? And the land that you're calling in from using the placenames.mapdev.ca link. You can find out the Mi'kmaq name for the land that you're on if you're in Mi'kma'ki, what motivated you to attend, and anything else you want to share as we start our time together. So I'd love for you to enjoy me in this land acknowledgement by acknowledging the land you're on. I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking from Guwagayet, which is colonially known as Citadel Hill, but the Mi'kmaq name means Big Pine Hill in Shipuktuk, which is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. The inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq were recognized in the Peace and Friendship Treaty signed with the Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples from 1725 to 1779. Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining in on the chat there. This series of treaties did not surrender Indigenous land, resources, or sovereignty to the British Empire, but instead established rules for an ongoing relationship between nations. Canada later reaffirmed the treaties in Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982, and they remain active to this day. And I'm hoping that folks, you can take time to pause in reflection and gratitude for the land that we work on, because it's deeply, deeply connected to the content that we're talking about today around decolonizing mental health. For many, especially white settlers like myself, it can be really helpful as we acknowledge the land to also acknowledge the ways that we are also nature. And so this quote from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures in the bottom says, "Understand that the earth is not an extension of our bodies, it's the other way around." So as humans on this planet, we are deeply entangled with the many creatures, living and non-living entities in this world. And if we hold on to that awareness, perhaps sometimes we can better acknowledge the land and deepen our commitment to decolonization and truth and reconciliation and support for Indigenous resistance and resurgence. And so as we acknowledge the land, let us take this moment to pause in gratitude for all who have and continue to heroically care and advocate for this beautiful land. May we join them in this sacred work. I believe that there are two forces that we all have to be able to support and deepen our efforts around. And I believe that's decolonization and climate justice. And I'm thinking about the work of land defenders around Hunter's Mountain up in Unama'ki who are engaged in resistance. And I think about people across Mi'kma'ki, across Turtle Island, and throughout the world who are engaged in Indigenous resistance and resurgence. Let us ground ourselves in the wisdom of the land-based Mi'kmaq teachings and values that we must all begin to learn. Let us work to decolonize ourselves, our practice, and this community that we share by working for justice for all living beings as an expression of our gratitude for being here. Let us take a deep breath and recenter ourselves away from the violent ways colonization fills our world and fills us. You know, how we think and relate and operate and practice, especially for settlers, colonization has filled our world and our mindsets and our worldviews, our beliefs. And so we have to work to decolonize that. Let us take a deep breath and work on letting go of the unconscious bias that is everywhere, inside and out. And hopefully our session today help us to be right in relationship with this land and with one another. And of course, we're all treaty people, and it's important to think about how does this impact what we do and how we do it? How does it guide our work together today and going forward? And I'm thinking of, especially in the States, the United States, but, south of the border here, it was called, I think, Indigenous Peoples Day, and President Trump has just reclassified it again as Christopher Columbus Day. And so thinking about the many ways that white supremacy and settler colonialism show up in our policies, and the actions of leaders in government systems, businesses, community. And so here in Mi'kma'ki, how as social workers and helpers, and people who are interested in decolonizing mental health, how do we deepen our commitment to treaty rights? How do we deepen our commitment to resistance and resurgence with Indigenous peoples? And of course, for the college is a regulatory body. We're committed to the Truth and Reconciliations Commission's calls to action specific to regulators. And for us here, in this work in PD, it's really about offering support and education for social workers and helpers in learning, but more importantly, unlearning. So deconstructing a lot of the ways that white supremacy and settler colonialism have shaped how we think and how we operate. Separate and distinct from our commitment to decolonization and truth and reconciliation, our land acknowledgements, is just our acknowledgement and our commitment to reparations for people of African descent. So at the college, we have a commitment to reparations. We understand that it's not just a moral obligation. We don't do it because it's the right thing to do. We also do it because it's a material obligation. We know that involves shifting policies, programs, resources, in making opportunities available for people who are from the distinct 52 African Nova Scotian communities across Mi'kma'ki. And for us, it looks like restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and then guarantees of non-repetition. If you're curious about our commitments to decolonization and reparations, I'll put the links in the chat again. I encourage you to look these up and see if there's ways that you can adapt some of the work that we're doing in your own agency and context. When we're thinking about reparations, we're thinking about the folks from the historical African Nova Scotian communities who have ancestry and lineage with the Black Loyalists, the Maroons, into the South American Black refugees, and how these legacies and these communities have shaped not just our cultural landscape, but our political, our economic landscape as well. So our session today, again, we're joined by Brenda Gear, who's going to introduce herself in a minute. And I just want to acknowledge Brenda's having some camera difficulties, so we'll hear her beautiful and wonderful voice and her presence in that way. So I'm grateful that she could be here today. We're also going to hear from 3 other people in pre-recorded content from Eskasoni. So you'll be hearing them. And one thing to note is I'm sharing my screen. It does have the sound function turned on, but when the videos start playing, it'd be really helpful if someone can let me know if you can hear the content or not. But we're going to be exploring some of the principles of decolonizing and indigenizing mental health. So some stories and examples from Eskasoni. Also, some stories and examples from Brenda. And then I'm going to offer some of my perspectives as a settler, Canadian, who's really deeply committed to decolonization of social work and mental health practices. We're going to look at some frameworks. One of them is the Ripples framework, but there's a couple other resources we wanted to share that could be helpful for you if you're looking to decolonize in your own practices. We'll have a Q&A if time, and then we'll have a checkout. So again, please use the chat and the Q&A function as much as you'd like. We'll try to get to it as we go. We'll hold on to the questions probably until the end of the session. But yeah, please engage as much as you'd like. Hopefully you have lunch or something cozy with you today as well, because it is chilly out there. So objectives, as with all of our sessions, I'm hoping that your time here today develops or shifts some knowledge, values, or skills around social work practice. And so please, hold a critical lens in this content, and hopefully there's things that you can integrate into your practice over time. For PD tracking, it is renewal time, renewal season. So for social workers on the call, you do have the opportunity to complete your renewals now up until January 31st. You can track this either under formal professional development or under the mandated topic of truth and reconciliation. And of course, this is driven by our new code of ethics. And so this is really touching upon all the values, respecting the dignity and worth of all people, promoting social justice, truth and reconciliation, valuing relationships, and I think most importantly, providing culturally responsive, competent professional services. It's really important when considering decolonizing or Indigenous ways of knowing and being, that they're not another form or some alternative method. They're a method and a way of operating and seeing and relating to the world that is valid and professional. And so by being in the session today and learning about decolonizing mental health, you're enriching your capacity to be providing culturally responsive, competent professional services. And some framing for our time together. This is from Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. And firstly, just want to say your engagement with this session may not have immediate and or practical applications for you, and that's okay. So challenging the consumer mindset that we can often bring into these spaces where we say or think, my expectations will get met just by being here today. That can happen. It might not happen. You might need some time to process and reflect, or you might need some time to journal and think, or perhaps this won't line up with your expectations at all, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with anything presented or shared, but ask you to be open to seeing what happens. So inviting some curiosity. It's possible through the content and information shared by the folks that have pre-recorded content, or the perspective shared by Brenda, or the perspective shared by me. We might disagree. That's possible. So invite you to have some curiosity around things that you might disagree with. Take responsibility for yourself by observing and learning from your conscious and unconscious responses. It's up to you to decide how much you want to share and participate. This is a webinar format, so we won't be engaging in group discussion, but some of you might be more passive today. That's okay. And then finally, we can all engage in ways that support others. So this is not a therapeutic space. It's not a place for healing, but healing can happen here. And how we relate to each other, how we show up for each other matters. So Jalasi, Atilihai, and welcome. So today we have myself, Tyler Colbourne, professional development consultant, Brenda Gear. We're also going to be hearing a little bit about the work being done at Eskasoni Health Centre with Angeline Denny Siliboy, Director of Mental Health. We're going to be hearing from Patricia Taylor, mental health nurse, and we'll be hearing from Heather Guthrow, who's also a clinical social worker out of Eskasoni. Brenda, I'd love for you to take some time to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm so sorry about the technical glitches with the visual part. I don't know. I know it's not in the universe today for it to happen, but thank you for being here. I am an Inuit social worker from Northern Labrador. I'm a transplant here to beautiful Unama'ki. Currently, I operate a 4-day clinic, 2 online or by phone, and the other 2 in Eskasoni. I started working there around the end of January, yes, this year. And, going there to Eskasoni, because I'm not First Nations, I'm learning also. And I think that's part of the decolonization process for all of us, is acknowledging that we are not in our own territories, kind of thing. When we are being invited, whether or not we are, being invited in or not, there are some of those things about being invited in and acknowledging that I am not from here, and learning about, what does decolonization from a social work perspective in mental health really look like. And honestly, like, there's so many different versions. I think depending on what we do, what is in our scope of practice, our roles as volunteers, each of these things are kind of a power, if you will, on, within community, also impacts us. There's so many different ways to look at this decolonization. And also looking at our own place in that. Mine's changed a lot. I was poor. I was, considered, I fit into the stats, or I did fit into the stats. We did fit into the stats. When I say we, I mean my family and I, of poverty. And that has changed. But that comes from a lot of determination. It comes from a lot of acknowledgement about our place at the table. And for me, that's what decolonization is all about, is finding our place at the table. And, being open to what that really looks like within your scope of practice. Whether it's private practice, it looks different again today. When you work in systems, after you get to know the systems that we work in for a little bit, we start to identify gaps and cracks. And, how can we fill those? I think that's also a part of decolonization. like where if I'm sitting with an individual who may be considered in that marginalized group, then it's decolonization, listening to the story. There's a difference between um, assessment and bearing witness. Assessment in mental health, also includes observation and observation of, what's going on around in your place, in their place, particularly when we're doing it in community. All those things need to be considered. What programs are being offered, knowing where they are, knowing how to reach somebody in that group. It's making those connections. It's listening to some of the stories, participating in some of the events for some people. Not everybody like to do it that way. That's okay. But it's important to understand where you're going, where we are going, not just you, us, where we're going and how we can contribute to that decolonizing process. I'm still decolonizing. I've been educated. I mean, formally educated, recognized education, formal education through my university degrees, one at Dalhousie and the other one at the University of British Columbia. How that translates into community practice, well, like that's something for the community to decide. And I think sometimes that's one of the hardest things for us as professionals slash experts, that quote unquote experts, sometimes it's hard to give up. But we also learn a lot when we do. We do, when it creates a different kind of space, people, a different kind of connection. And, like to go back to trauma informed care, learning about, how the brain operates, how it can be impacted by adverse experiences, whether in systems or personally. Sometimes, it's a combination of both. And, trying to figure out, where does my assessment lie? Where do my skills lie? How do I help decolonize that? What do I do as a, practical clinician, as somebody who um, people sometimes come to for help. So people come to us for help all the time. I think that's really like at the kind of crux of it. Like people come to social work for help. And I think it's important to find our way to do that in a meaningful way. And sometimes it means a lot of new learning. Like I said, I'm still decolonizing as well. I was in, I grew up on the north coast of Labrador for 9 years. I'm 65. Most of my learning, I carry a lot of that with me. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of connection to the people, to the struggle, to the awareness, to the stories, to the experiences, being on ice, being, going fishing and carrying water. And, I mean, decolonizing can look so different because, it can mean access to clean running water, and like that is something that many of us take for granted. How do we do that? Supporting people in mental health. People, I mean, like at Eskasoni Mental Health, there are, that toast and tea program means so much to so many people because they have a place to come in out of the rain, out of the cold. And it's more than that, though. It's a smiling face, like, yeah, what do you want in your tea today? How are you today? That connection that everybody is looking for. And I think that's what decolonization, can mean to somebody. Is sometimes it doesn't have to be a real big gesture, although there does need to be big gestures. I'm not saying that that is not required. And funding, when we listen to Angeline and, trying to connect with, as a mental health director in her community, and everybody's kind of in different areas of the community, it's hard to stay connected. But at the same time, still knowing what's going on in your community. Yeah, that's a hard thing to do. It's a big job. Land-based stuff, acknowledging, the importance of that connection for people, supporting that language, those other ways of knowing and being. And sometimes it's, yeah, I can't be here today because I got to go to a sweat kind of thing, you know? And hey, that's what it sometimes looks like. I had a I had a client. She said, "Your time is all about corporate." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Like your schedule is corporate." I'm going, like, "What does that mean exactly?" And sometimes it is adjusting your schedule. Sometimes it's being asked to do things, that is really outside of, other, everybody has other related duties. I think everybody here on the call, looks at that last line of our roles and responsibilities when we're applying for a job, other related duties that can encompass so many different things.
Brenda, so many other related duties. I imagine that's relatable for all social workers on the call today, because I think everyone has probably been called to do something outside of the job description from time to time, whether you're in community or health. And yeah, thank you for sharing and grounding us the session in like your own experience and your own humility and learning. I think it's an important distinction in that the forces of settler colonialism have impacted everyone, not everyone equally at all, but the social constructions, the cognitive imperialism, the dominance of ways of knowing and being have created the conditions for everyone to experience some sort of adverse effect from settler colonialism. Lots of people benefit from it as well. But I believe in a truly liberated world, a truly decolonized world, we'd be able to move past it and all benefit from decolonizing. I'll share a little bit about myself just so people understand where I'm coming from. I am a settler Canadian, and Brenda and the other speakers on this will be driving most of the content, but I might be offering some of my own settler perspective. Very, very grateful and lucky and privileged to have done my Master of Social Work at University of Victoria, which was grounded in Indigenous resistance and resurgence. And so yeah, I have lots to learn. I will continue to learn. But some of the things that I bring towards this from a settler perspective around decolonizing and my own accountabilities comes from my education and the relationships that I built through that program. And I'm forever grateful for the life-changing experience of that school and the professors and my colleagues and peers. So I'm bringing a lot of their insights and wisdom and brilliance with me into this session and to my work in social work practice. And for me, one of the things I think about as someone, of European, mostly Irish descent, who's here in Canada on these lands, Indigenous lands, Mi'kmaq lands, I was like, what is my accountability towards decolonizing and how do I wrestle with the paradox of that? So we're offering this session on decolonizing mental health, and I work for the regulator of social workers, which is under a colonial legislation. So there are paradoxes within that. And I'll be the first to say that I hope that we're working towards a time when we don't need regulation in the colonial context. Maybe it looks like something that is based in community and in relationships. We're not there yet, but I hope that we do get there. Maybe it'll happen in my lifetime, maybe it won't. But that's what I carry forward as a settler Canadian social worker in this role. I'm constantly thinking about like, how do we disrupt internally while also imagining something beyond what we currently have. We're going to continue forward, and I wanted to share a little bit how we conducted or planned for the session. So we did an interview with Eskasoni Health Centre with Patricia and Heather and Angeline, and these are the questions we asked. Please describe your program and how people access these services. Do you have any stats you would like to share with us? For example, how many did the Toast and Tea program serve? How many connected with the IRS or the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls program since January 1st? These were questions that were created by Brenda, and Brenda works with these folks, and so we have relationships established already, which was great. Also, we have questions around, in your opinion, what would be the most effective way to improve programming? As an administrator, tell us about your current partnerships and future prospects for mental health services in Eskasoni. As an administrator, what are your current priorities and how would you describe the current model of care for mental health? And are there any special projects or events that you'd like to share with us? And so what we've done is taken the content from that interview. Oh, thanks, Melanie and folks, for answering the question in the chat around that. Appreciate it. What Brenda and I did is we held an interview with these folks back in April, and we've taken excerpts from that interview and threaded it through this presentation. And so we'll hear from the folks from Eskasoni. Brenda will share her insights and thoughts on some of the questions that come out of that content. I might share a little bit as well, and then we'll have some frameworks and resources to share. And you know, this interview happened April, so a while ago now. So it's possible that some of the perspectives shared in the content today might be different currently in this moment, because that's how things work. Things change and they adapt over time. But I want to start off by talking, oh, hi, Brooke, thanks so much. Talking about sort of the colonial roots and branches and leaves of helping in social work. And so as a white settler Canadian who works within a regulatory context in social work, you know, I never wanted to be a social worker because a lot of the social workers I had met in community were jaded, bitter, causing harm. But I did find my way here. I'm very proud to be a social worker, but I've resisted it for a long time. And in my MSW program, in one of my courses, I read this article, Shock and Awe, Trauma as the New Colonial Frontier by Natalie Clark, who I believe is a settler. But she quoted Joseph Gahn, who's an Indigenous psychologist out of Harvard. And he writes, mental health professionals are the missionaries for a new millennium. And I remember reading that quote and being struck quite hard by the content of it and the meaning of it. And it took me a while to wrestle with it. You know, I talked with lots of my peers. You know, I was lucky to talk with some folks who actually work with Joseph Gahn about this quote and sort of the framing around it. And what I've come to understand and believe is that there's always a risk within a settler colonial white supremacist context that we can adapt to assimilate, meaning that even though social justice is grounded in values of social work is grounded in values of social justice, we're striving towards decolonization, we're striving for, you know, anti-oppressive practice, we're always at risk of upholding the dominance. We're always at risk of adapting things so they just slightly change the dominant norms, just slightly change things, but still upholds white supremacy, still upholds settler colonialism. And so this article in particular was talking about the overuse of trauma as a way to describe, you know, things that were generational impacts from genocide or enslavement, or, you know, things that happened through the process of settler colonialism and white supremacy as it was built up here over hundreds of years. And so words have power. And I like this quote. It helps me deepen my understanding of my accountability as a settler social worker and recognizing that I have a choice every single day in every single relationship, every single moment to either resist and disrupt or to assimilate or prop up the dominant norms. And so I see the roots and branches and leaves of social work coming from the settler colonial context. Doesn't mean that we have the opportunity to do better and strive for decolonizing and improving our relationships and relationality and relational accountability. But there's always the risk that we can be upholding and reinforcing the dominant norms. Brenda, what do you think about this quote?
When I hear the word, or when I see the word, when I read the word missionary, I think of religion and organized religion in particular. And I'm not over the impact that organized religion has had on Indigenous folk. I know there are a lot of people who practice organized religion, but you know, to me, that's what it is. And I'm not a missionary. I'm not. I'm simply not a missionary. You know, any woman who is wants to be a part of shared information, evidence based information, particularly when it comes to mental health. We have our own, you know, how do I say this? Sometimes in all Indigenous cultures, there are visionaries, and visionaries are people who see things. Visionaries are people who can imagine things. Visionaries are people who can almost not predict, but kind of see what's coming because of past experiences. And to me, that's what, you know, that's what's more important. I think we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble when we rely on one perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Brenda. I think that's important. And when we think about the dominance of the, settler colonialism and white supremacy, it reinforces this idea of binary thinking a lot of the time. And so as we decolonize, as I strive to decolonize, I try to take the holistic approach, and holistic is often in the context that I've been in is spelled WH rather than just H, and to embrace this idea that we are part of a greater whole and we have to be using many frameworks, many worldviews, many different approaches because we are complex humans in many different contexts. So, pardon me. We're going to get started. And this is we're going to be hearing from Angeline Denny Siliboy, the Director of Mental Health Services. And this is a little bit of an introduction into describing the programs and services of Eskasoni.
We are under the Eskasoni band, and under the Eskasoni band, we're under the Eskasoni Health Centre, and we are funded by the Eskasoni band. Current partnerships, we have a partnership with the Pathways Project, and that's with Nova Scotia Health, the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, IWK and Nova Scotia Health, and the Health Centre. I think I said Nova Scotia Health twice, but we are working towards better services for our community, and we are hopeful that we are mirroring services with the Nova Scotia Health. We have established, right now we have a clinic that was in the past 1 day a week for psychiatry clinic, and today we have 2 to 3 days of virtual with Dr. Viano, and we have now also in-house psychiatry for 2 half days out of a month. So starting from 1 day, we have quite an improvement in our psychiatry clinics in Eskasoni, and we're quite pleased where we have had the opportunity to diagnose and treat and have people medicated and working towards better mental health. We are in partnerships with a lot of the Eskasoni other agencies like Mi'kmaq Family and Children's Services. We work collaboratively together. I'm on several committees, and we all work towards better mental health in our community. Mental health is just a piece of the puzzle, but it's not solely the responsibility of the community. Mental health is also child welfare. It also belongs at NADICA, where Mi'kmaq Lodge and NADICA work towards alcohol and drug healing. We also work with the school, and we provide services at the school, and we have partnerships with MLSN, where they contact us to sometimes be in their healing circles. So we have a lot of avenues that we work towards better, I guess, understanding and moving towards healing for our First Nations communities.
Brenda, I just heard the little snippet of your voice from that recording. Apologies. Brenda, I'm curious from your perspective, what does healing look like in the context of decolonizing and indigenizing mental health services?
What does it look like? Honestly, I would rather go with what does it feel like? Because um, there's a part like when we meet people for the first time. I'm speaking from like both as a mental health consumer and as a practitioner, as a social worker, as a professional. There's so many different ways that are you know that can impact the way that we present today, including the experiences of our clients. And when we take that breath, that you mentioned earlier in the beginning, like how important it is to breathe and to really acknowledge, the energy in the room, so to speak. We do need to acknowledge that. And sometimes people do show up angry, and it can look like you're being defiant. It can feel like or look like people are being difficult, non-compliant, all of those things. And so providing a space for people to speak to their frustrations while they're trying to navigate a very complex mental health system here in Nova Scotia, I think requires time and patience to do that. Not to lay blame. I mean, it's not about that. It's about finding access in a way that's meaningful for the patient to build their own resource system within the province, within the community. I think that's one of the biggest barriers for me, is that how do I help people navigate? How do I identify, and also listen to, what is it that they need? And because sometimes, like working in these systems, we identify the barriers. We don't see them right away because, well, I mean, we are observers and we're new. We're all learners, whether you're 65 or 25. We're all learners. We can all learn something new. And particularly when we're going into a new area of practice, a new scope of practice, a new institution, a new agency, a new role, switching roles, and what does it mean in the context of the people that we are serving currently? Because social workers change a lot of roles, right? Or I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say it that way. Social workers have a lot of opportunity to work in a lot of different areas. And our experiences we will recognize gaps. Let's just say it that way. Sometimes we get better at, yeah, this feels familiar. And sometimes it's not always in a good way. And so I think that's where the colonialization or the decolonizing can happen, I guess. Like you use your skills. We all have that knowledge. We're skilled at this. We have skills from our education. That's our privilege. That's a part of our privilege. How do we share that information to, I don't know if you want to say, to give people an opportunity to meet their goals, whether it's in education or through work, through spirituality, formal education, whatever that might look like for them. Because, I mean, not everybody wants to go to university. Not everybody You know, there's so many different ways of knowing and being happy and feeling connected, you know, and I think that's one of the things we all have in common. All humans have in common is we want that connection. That I think if we look at the work of, you know, Dr. Gabor Mate, we look at Bessel van der Kolk and, you know, like those crazy neurodivergent people, you know, how their expertise on the brain and how it operates under trauma or after trauma or during trauma, you know, presents a very different way of knowing and being in the world that, you know, wasn't available to us, to anybody, not just Indigenous folk, to anybody. I mean, really, we had AA, we had dementia, and we had nervous breakdowns back in the day. That's what, you know, like that's how we categorize people, you know. Now it's so different today. So imparting that information, you know, uh, our teachings, our learnings, our takeaways from our classes at university, even stats. I mean, I hated stats, but you know what? It's important to know how to read stats, though. When we look at trends, that's also a part of decolonizing. It's not always pretty, and sometimes it is very taxing. And that's why, you know, like I think there needs to be different kinds of approaches to all of this. You know, at the individual level, we can do that, you know, social worker to social worker, client to client. Then there's also the community levels, provincial levels, national levels, global levels. You know, there's so many different areas that, you know, social work can take us, right? But whatever feels right for you, and we can all contribute in our own way. And sometimes change just takes a lot of time for people to kind of get it. Sometimes, I mean, we shake our heads. Yeah, we do. That's just part of the process. But we get up and, you know, we look at it in a different way. And at the end of the day, decolonizing is, you know, a different way of solution focus principles and parameters that are inclusive of Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the world.
Thanks, Brenda. And I just want to draw attention to in the chat that Tanya shared. Decolonizing mental health should validate the identity of the Indigenous client. The things that were looked down upon or restricted, such as our ceremonies, land-based activities, and our hunting and gathering activities. It also means revitalizing our language and our ways of learning and living. And I think it's such an important distinction that I do believe that decolonizing will help everyone, but the priority really should be around Indigenous resistance and resurgence. And as a settler Canadian in a social work context, I feel my accountability is to be seeking to disrupt and decolonize in the ways that I have power and influence, and also, you know, stepping in and leaning into what Cindy Blackstock calls moral courage, right? Because there are times where the power and privilege that I have might be impactful or beneficial to supporting decolonizing and indigenizing as an ally. And also really important to not appropriate or assimilate ways of knowing and being or practices from Indigenous worldviews and practices into my own practice. It's a constant tension and balance every single day of trying to figure out in relationship what is the right thing to do and move forward, and to be listening to folks like you, Brenda, and then folks here on the call, on the webinar, because there's loads of expertise and leadership and rad work being done with many of the people on the call here today. Let's keep going. We're going to continue listening about the describing the programs and services from Angeline.
We practice on a holistic approach using the medicine wheel. We always provide healing through physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. We believe that providing food and adequate food supplies also is helpful to our programs and the therapies that we provide. So we have a food security program that is currently run by Liliana Simon. And we have a pantry that offers food to our clients on a daily basis. And we also collaborate with the Eskasoni Food Bank. And that's another another partnership that we have in our community. I probably am missing so many partnerships that we have in our community because we work with everyone in our community. But the current model, like I said, is we practice on a holistic two-eyed seeing approach, which is bringing in the cultural, whatever is appropriate with our culture, and also using the Western approach to clinical therapy. So using trauma-based, using all the Western approaches of healing, but also incorporating our culture. So every opportunity that we get, we incorporate our culture within our community. And now we have our own land-based program, which houses healing through nature, through the land, through the waters, through teachings, through ceremonies. And we really take pride in what we have here at Eskasoni Mental Health. We have an awesome team, and our team is very educated in the two-eyed seeing approach and uses this approach to heal our First Nations community. Did I miss anything else? What are your current priorities? Of course, the current priorities are to reduce mental health barriers in our community as well as the surrounding communities. At Cape Breton Regional Hospital, we hope to continue to work on the barriers that are in place, like racism, the wait time, people just not wanting to go to the hospital for various reasons. So we try to have resources here as much as possible. We, as you know, we now have our mental health nurse who, alongside with intake, provides support to people coming into our facility for the very first time. And she navigates services through the Cape Breton Regional Hospital as well as Nova Scotia Health and IWKS. So we're very fortunate to have her, and we're very fortunate to have our team and my leaders.
We're going to continue to hear from more people from Eskasoni Health Centre.
I've been doing mental health nursing for many, many years, 35 plus years. And one of the challenges has always been to have Western medicine look at individuals as individuals themselves. We've gone through client-centered care, person-centered care, but in working in Eskasoni, really truly, it is about the individual with respect to the fact that it takes a village, to raise a child, and everybody really is coming from the same page in that there's no separation in working with the medicine wheel between physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual health. So that, for me, again, the only thing I can say is from a mental health perspective, it's really quite extraordinary. So I'm very honored and privileged as an ally to be able to work in the community. Oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start with what I do. We're building as we go. There's so many opportunities, and there's so much, not just request for service, but people's intention to give good service to people for what they need in the moment, based on who they are, their culture, their community, and what they need.
One thing that was surfaced, I think, in the last slide and through your voice, Brenda, is that helping and healing happen outside of social work. And so it's important as well to understand that social work is one avenue, and it's probably the largest body of mental health workers in Mi'kmaq. And people are doing rad work everywhere and healing work everywhere. So Brenda, I'm curious, how might social workers and helpers move beyond the dominant Western Eurocentric approach to healthcare?
Oh, wow. I think we need to find our own level of comfort We have, like, when we are offering help, I think it's important to understand our own intention, and what that looks like. The intention is good, but the actual application needs to come from the community members, whether it's picking boughs for the tent or the floor, or the floor of the tent, sorry, whether it's setting up practice in Eskasoni or in Waikagama, or creating a space in Halifax for Indigenous folk to come and talk about their mental health concerns, to get assessments. It's going to look different everywhere, because everybody has experienced it differently, but we all have shared experiences. But the implications of those experiences are very different. Older people have, most older people, and I'm generalizing here, maybe I shouldn't be, but it's my understanding, is that language, in Indigenous older folks are more common. And there's a really big emphasis, a strong emphasis now on language. And I get that, because there are some things that just cannot be translated, and I think there's the knowing how to create a space for that invitation of language, not just for the sense of learning the language, but also of understanding the context of healing, what it means for them. Working in Labrador, a lot of times, many times, social workers, and I'm sure it's still true to this day, when you work in child welfare, you work with community service workers. And they are people who we work with on a daily basis to help bridge the communication gap so people understand the processes when it comes to child welfare, what's expected, what they can, not what's expected of them per se, but what's expected throughout the process. Because sometimes there's just not any words that can that translates easily. And today, more and more Indigenous folk, their first language is English. And so, I mean, like, to be able to honor that space for Indigenous language and ceremonies is really important, because I like the purpose of it, is to instill knowledge. And I think that's a part of our role too, is to, to help share that information that we know as clinical social workers, as social workers in general, how important it is to let people know that, we are allies, like Patricia said. Allies are very important in this work, whether you're Indigenous or no. Our networking abilities can make a big difference, to even when we're not working in those fields anymore, but we still have contacts in those areas. Like I can connect you with this one or that one or the other one. It becomes very important. So knowing, a little bit about where you are and where you're going, and be willing to share that information. And sometimes I think we can, intentional or no, I don't think it's intentional. Sometimes I think that we get so busy, and particularly in child welfare or in crisis response stuff, how busy we get, and how full our days are, So it can be easy, like, to kind of disconnect from that, right? Because sometimes we need to do that anyway. So we can't, that's why it's important for us to have those different allies when we know that, like, we're really freaking tired at the end of the shift, but we know we got follow-up to do, and who can help us do that sometimes. And sometimes that's what decolonizing looks like. One of the hardest jobs I've ever done was child welfare, but they're also one of the best teams I've ever worked with. And being that support people, like getting away from that, my job is done here at 4 o'clock. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes we do need to close off. Absolutely. We can't do it all day, every day. Nobody wants us to do that. It's not good for us to do that, to be in, work mode all day, every day. It's just tiresome when we're in this kind of work, right? Decolonizing, trauma-informed care, narrative therapy, solution-focused, diagnostics. It's a lot of work.
Brenda, yeah, it's a lot of work and it's never ending work. And I think for settlers like myself, especially white folks, I think it's too easy to just lean back into our own comfort and convenience and in our roles, and believing that the policies and the practices are the only way. And I think if we center relationships and work in a relational way, it often calls upon us to go beyond our job description at times, or take an extra moment to make a phone call, or follow up with someone, or explore things together. I think it's really easy to just be like, well, that's the policy, or that's the way things work, under the dominant context. And for settlers in particular, I think it's important that we resist that and disrupt that wherever we can.
I also think it's important for us to recognize when, our level of effort, in that kind of an exchange, like, where am I going to put my effort now? Like,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, for me, the center of that, all of that is, are my clients. So it's more important for me to kind of find another, as another colleague used to say, it's called a workaround, Brenda. I'm going to work around. I go, what's that? She goes, it's how you got to find a way to work around it, man. I go, oh, okay. And so we do have to kind of get creative sometimes, and I think it's like Alec was saying at our, at the roadshow earlier this week, like, we do have to acknowledge that sometimes we do have to look at things differently, and how we can use the information that we have, use the positions of power that we have, use the influence that we might have, to see how we can kind of steer the outcome in a different direction, more towards that getting excited about, that kid going back to school, or, that woman who is trying to get back into the workforce, that young man who hasn't had a job for a long time, who had to quit school, like, that person who has experienced a lot of bullying at school and couldn't go back. And, like, there's so many ways that people have experienced colonization. And because really, to me, colonization, and, in a very kind of broader sense, is violence. And people experience violence in so many different ways today. I mean, like the internet, for example, that was not alive, in the early days, in my beginnings. Cyberbullying is something that's very different, that is new for me as an older adult. It's not, but children experience that all the time. And so, I mean, like, there's so many different areas that we can look at. How do we reduce the levels of violence in our communities and with our clients? I think that's, and I think that's where those allies can really help us.
Mhm. Thanks, Brenda. I completely agree. And just want to acknowledge that some folks might have to leave right at 1 today. We're going to continue on for a little bit. We have a few more things to share, but just a reminder, this is recorded. And so it will be available on YouTube later on as well. So if you want access to the resources. And I put the link to this presentation in the chat, and I'll put it in there again. So if anyone wants to watch this on their own time, they're welcome to. Let's continue on.
Here at the Wellness Clinic, we see everybody across the lifespan. I work primarily with older teens and adults on a range of mental health issues, but we see kids and young teens. So I mean, we could really see any type of issue. Really, the folks that I see, a lot of depression, definitely lots of trauma, anxiety. I mean, it really, it really could be anything. And we use, both the Western and traditional approaches, the two-eyed seeing approach. And I just focus on, what works best for them, like what they feel, most comfortable with. And it really depends on them. Sometimes I could may find myself, and depending on client situation, referring, to other sources of support or other services. That could be, seeing Patricia for maybe further assessment, psychiatry, maybe additional supports in the community like Jordan's principle. So it really depends on what the client needs. And I think too, allyship is extremely, critical for, for me working in the community, just being very well educated on First Nations history and the approaches that are going to work best for my clients. So that's definitely critical. For me in doing this work, I'd really like to, focus on maybe doing more group work. And Patricia mentioned that we're going to be doing like a grief support group later on this afternoon, and that's going to be like the first session. But I really would like to focus on doing more group work. I'm not really sure how that's going to look, but that's kind of like the direction that I'm going into. So yeah, that's all I have to say right now.
And so thinking about, we're talking about allyship, talking about, the role and responsibilities of people to be striving towards decolonization, thinking about like the two-eyed seeing approach from Elder Albert Marshall, or ways of blending Indigenous and non-Indigenous frameworks or worldviews into mental health practice. Brenda, any other insights or thoughts on how folks can adopt a two-eyed seeing approach and implement it, or approach things with a blend of Indigenous and non-Indigenous frameworks?
I think it's important for us to have some general knowledge about Indigenous epistemologies. I also think it's very important. I really like Heather's approach in that, it's come as you are kind of approach, and we'll see how I can be helpful within my own areas of knowledge and expertise. Also knowing that there's a big support and lots of participation in, cultural practices in Eskasoni through the land-based programming. There are sweats, there are different kinds of ceremonies for men and women. There are different kinds of events that are through the Eskasoni mental health, through the youth space, they're even through the church. They have Eagle's Nest. There's so many different ways that people can engage in therapy in Eskasoni. And people see it daily because all of it is centered at the health center and through and accessed through the crisis center. So they are basically the hub for mental health and addiction services in Eskasoni. And so if anybody has any questions about really what's going on, they also have a Facebook page. That's the other thing. When you're talking about decolonization, there's lots of ways to find out what's going on in community. All of, the 13 bands in Nova Scotia, they all have Facebook pages. They all have web pages. Lots of different ways of finding out what's going on. Lots of different ways. Some people may even want to look at, what's available in terms of nursing or social work or mental health and addictions or, the Schools Plus programs. There's so many different ways to actually kind of work in that. And sometimes it is, sometimes you really don't get a feel for what's happening in community until you work in community. It's one thing to have the connection. It's another one to actually work in it. So, there's always going to be that kind of, well, what do you do? And that's true for any profession, I think. In in social work, I don't know if it's still the same. I've been a social worker for more than 20 years now. But first, when I came into my real introduction to social work was in child welfare. And I don't know if it's still the same kind of attitude going on now, but back in the day, it was if you didn't do child welfare, you didn't know social work. Because in child welfare, that like Angela was saying, it can encompass so many different areas, and now that has kind of I don't know, split, if you will. When we were doing child welfare back in the day, we were often doing mental health and addictions work as well. Today, it's becoming more specialized. So I think as we get, as we learn, or as we are learning about the complexity of mental health, then sometimes those things need to be broken down because they are so complex, and that we do need to have different areas of specialty for looking at trauma, for looking at grief and loss, for looking at addiction. And sometimes it is about the historical context and opportunities that people have experienced as an Indigenous person as well. And sometimes that's the best thing that we can do is listen.
Thanks, Brenda. I could listen to you all day, as you know. Brenda also has a lot of amazing, funny stories. And so I appreciate hearing Brenda and all the ways that you show up in this work and in relationship. And I think for settlers like myself, one of the things that's really important as we engage on the lifelong journey of decolonization is being very careful not to appropriate or assimilate. I know I've mentioned this a few times before. You're asking the question right now, Dallas. Any thoughts how settlers can incorporate Indigenous frameworks with mindfulness and respect of avoiding appropriation? I don't think I can speak to that fully, but we may be able to speak to it at the end. But I often hear from white settler social workers reaching out, using the language grounded in Indigenous ways of knowing and being, or decolonial approaches, but reframing it in a way that supports their individual needs. And we have to be really mindful of that. We live in a capitalist white supremacist society where it's too easy to appropriate, and that happens in so many different spaces. And so while we want to incorporate and embrace and empower Indigenous ways of knowing and being through a resistance and resurgence lens, we have to be really mindful of the ways that the systems can appropriate and take out the pieces that they like, but then throw away the rest. And so really important to be mindful of our connection to land, to spirit, and be listening and working with from a place of respect and honoring Indigenous folks and allies that we're in relationship with. We're going to keep moving here. There's a couple more presentations from folks from Eskasoni.
Space. We need more boardrooms. We only have one boardroom here, a big boardroom here in our health center. I think we need our own separate building so that it can house everyone of all my departments in one building, so that we could collaborate easily. The clinical team is in a different location, as well as the residential school support staff and the youth space are also in a different building, and the land-based are in a different building. So I don't get to see everyone on a daily basis. I do see crisis on a daily basis and the business that happens here. And Lily also is located here, which is the food security program. I think those are the biggest barriers. We certainly have room to improve. We're looking at improving our intake department, having more intake staff and an intake manager. We're looking at, I asked for the Head Start building, which hopefully Carly will consider, so that we can kind of build more of an alley center there and have a safe injection site and a lot more that we want to have for our clients. We only have a small foyer, as you can see when they come in.
Yes.
And we serve food, so there's no place for them to sit. There's no place for them to warm up. If all the chairs are full, then there's no room for more. So, and there's a lot of homelessness in our community. You know, I never realized that, even working at Mi'kmaq Family, how much homelessness is present here. Because I hear, you know, clients will tell us, oh, when we did a program a couple of weeks ago, and a lady came in with 3 layers, and she took all her layers off. And I said, is that your coat? She said, all of those are my coats. And I said, okay, it is chilly out. She said, yeah, it's chilly if you're homeless. You need all those layers. So it takes me back to, you know, being able to not provide a shelter for our people. It's extremely sad. We also don't have a special needs place for people, like a home as what Wegoma has, the Maui Donk, where a lot of people who can't live on their own for various reasons and disabilities have a place to stay there and they're supported. We don't have that in our community. We don't have a homeless shelter. There's so much need for that. And, you know, like that's some of the things that we can work on in our future. But for now, we need the funding, we need the dollars, we need to be supported by the government, right?
As Angeline shared, you know, there are barriers to decolonizing mental health. There are barriers to addressing the needs of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, especially Indigenous folks and Mi'kmaq folks in Eskasoni. Brenda, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the barriers to decolonizing mental health, and how might social workers, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, address these barriers?
The needs have changed a lot in mental health services from an Indigenous perspective. And also, I mean, like, even if we look at it from a national perspective, let's look at COVID, for example, and how that impacted people's mental health. And now those needs really haven't kind of, how do I say this? I think the pandemic showed us where there were gaps that really we didn't think about in the provision of mental health services, both virtually and not virtually. I think it showed us gaps in or areas of concern, particularly when it comes to cyberbullying, when it comes to lateral violence, when it comes to, you know, violence in general. I think that getting that space together for looking at what's important for our communities. When I say our, I mean Eskasoni. I shouldn't say our because, I mean, I'm a mental health provider there. Yes, I'm an Indigenous person, but I am not a member of, you know, I'm not a Mi'kmaq person. So it's really important that we hear from them. What does it mean for them? What does that look like? And I think that's the space that we need to create when we are working with people outside of our own communities, our own familiarities, our, you know, I think communities probably encompasses it better because we all live in our own kind of communities. I mean, like and even today in Canada has the landscape of Canadians and the people who live here are very different today. And I think it's really important that no matter what community we are from, no matter what community we are connected to, I think it's really important that we do our best to support those values, and learn and understand those values and live by those values, care by those values. Because at the end of the day, we're all looking for connection. You know, as Gabor Mate says, you know, it's all about the connection. And I really believe that because a lot of times, I mean, loneliness and depression, you know, like when we look at, you know, people statistically in that for depression, they are often very isolated. The same can also be said for women who are experiencing domestic violence. So there are, and those people who are experiencing harmful involvement with alcohol or drugs. There are disconnections from our families. And so, I mean, like we are all wired for that, you know, for that connection. And so I think, you know, finding our own way to include that person, include that person in our space in a way that they feel heard. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And we may not be able to change the system. Systems are hard to change, man. We all know that. It takes a long time to change a system because really what we're changing is power. Nobody wants to give up their power. So, I mean, like, let's not kid ourselves and think that this is going to happen today. But what we can do is, you know, maybe give somebody a little bit of personal power so that they can, you know, they have the information that they need to maybe do things differently in a way that works for them. And even if they don't, we're still there tomorrow in a non-judgmental kind of way.
Thanks, Brenda. Yeah, you always have so many nuggets of wisdom and truth. And I don't know if you're seeing the chat, some people have had to step off, but lots of people just really appreciating the insights you're sharing and also agreeing with me that we could listen to you all day. I believe there's one more video with speaking, and then we're gonna have some more wrap-up content. Let's get through that.
Land-based is going to offer a lot of the cultural ways of healing through the land with medicine picking. Just going down, we're going to be building a trail going down to the beach area where Jolita's building is located. I'm just looking at some quotes and stuff for that. Hoping to build stairs going down so that we can have we can use the waters for healing. We're going to be building a teepee and a sacred fire, and we're going to have our own health center sweat lodge that we'll have as part of healing. So I'm very excited because not a lot of people can do well, there's a lot of people that can do talk therapy, but there's also the people that may choose to do healing through the land. So very excited. Jolita's team is just starting this week, so it'll be up and running.
That's a good point because some people do have a preference for land-based healing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially a lot of the older, I find,
Yeah.
generation, but even the new generation that are coming out now that they want to go back to speaking their
Absolutely.
language. Yeah.
Mhm.
Brenda, I know that you're very passionate about land-based healing and land-based approaches, and I'm just curious if there's any other thoughts around lessons from land-based approaches that people can apply in their own practice.
There are things that we experience as individuals, both as Indigenous and non-Indigenous folk, that are very personal and very private. When I think about healing sometimes, and I look at it from a trauma-informed lens, who do I want to give that to, or what do, or should I give that to somebody? You know what I mean? Because sometimes the stories are difficult and we're not quite ready to share them with another human, not because we don't trust them, but because the harm that it may cause to family and friends. Some people in Indigenous communities choose not to share some of their most painful experiences with their families and their friends for that very reason. And so we have to find a way to not re-traumatize, but also to figure out, to lessen that kind of load, so to speak. Where do we go? We go to the land. We give it to the land. We give it to the water. That's what we do because we know they can absorb it. And they're also there to absorb it, not in the kind of messed up shit that's going on with Nova Scotia Power and trying to bulldoze, the mountains and take control of that. That's not what I mean by that. That's not healing. That's power. That's a power grab. That's all that is. And people know that. Most people outside of corporate will know that. But the land is, we see land as that, as connection, as interconnectedness, as a part of the whole. When we look at psychology, and we can actually study the parts, in psychology, and delve into the many different aspects of personality. And but when it comes to our own healing, it doesn't, I don't know how to explain the connection between me and Seal Hunting. I have no idea. All I can tell you is that I know how I feel when I'm on the ice. I know how I feel when I'm picking berries. I know how I feel when I'm starting a fire at the cabin. You know, like that's something that we have to experience and that's just a part of our what do you self-care, I guess. You know, it's the spa, but for Indigenous folk. And it's like, you know, I mean, like, who thinks of a spa on the ice? Trust me, being on the ice in Labrador in the middle of spring, on, is absolutely incredible. And I have yet to find another avenue that can present that same kind of feeling. And so, you know, it's just like the rest of us, you know, like when we finally get to take that 2 week vacation down in Florida and we get to chill, because that's what chill means to you. Chill means Florida, chill means sun. Sometimes, you know, that chill just looks very different for Indigenous folk. And, you know, and sometimes it is a lot of work, trust me. Going out on the land is no joke, getting ready, and you got to have the money to do it, by the way. Not everybody is privileged enough to do it either. So yeah, I mean, you know, those holistic practices, what people would consider holistic practices, I guess, it's just a way of life. Getting the nets ready, getting up early in the morning, setting the nets, knowing when the berries are good, knowing where not to pick the berries also, because there's a lot of contamination nowadays. So, you know, also knowing that, and you know, and just letting people go to their own space and getting their own requirements met, whether it's through a smudge or through a fire, berry picking, fishing, feeding our family, sharing food, having a laugh. You know, laughing is good. Humor is good. I mean, I was sitting out here on the deck earlier this morning, and I thought, okay, I'm questioning my sanity now because there was a little gray cat came in the backyard, and I waved at it. I'm going, oh my God, I think I'm losing my mind. You know, so I mean, like just those events that happen in day to day. You know, bring your experiences. Just keep it genuine. That's all, and say it like you mean it. And you just show up. Sometimes all you got to do is show up.
Brenda, I can always guarantee that whatever conversation we have is going to go deep, you know, but it's also going to be full of laughter. And it's one of the things I appreciate about the relationship we've built and the work that we've done together. But I agree, laughter is medicine. And but the issues we're facing are also urgent and heavy, but we can hold both. And in response to this question around land-based approaches to mental health, oh, thanks for Kim for being here as well. Just noticing in the chat some people are signing off. But for land-based approaches and for settlers like myself, many people in this world have been disconnected from land through forces of capitalism, white supremacy. And for settlers, I really encourage folks to critically reflect on and think about what are the ways capitalism and white supremacy and settler colonialism have disconnected you from the land. In my own journey towards striving for decolonization, I've been trying to develop a deeper appreciation and understanding of the ways that I am nature, the ways I am connected to nature. This is not the land that I come from. You know, most of my ancestry is in Ireland, but even through the process of settler colonialism, I've been disconnected from some of those ancestral knowledges and wisdom from the Celtic folks. Not anywhere in the near in the same way as Indigenous people, but it can be helpful for many settlers to reflect on and consider the ways you've also been disconnected from the land. I'm wondering, Brenda, any closing thoughts on your end around like your vision for truly decolonized mental health services in Mi'kma'ki or throughout Turtle Island, or any other actionable steps that you want to share? Brenda, just you're on mute there. You might just be thinking, I'm not sure, but just wanted to let
Sorry.
you know.
I think we just need to show up. you know, I think we need to, yeah, just show up in that space where, you know, I want to be helpful. I know that sounds really corny and really simplistic, but at the end of the day, really, it doesn't need to be any more complex than that. People will know. People know how you make them feel. They will always gravitate towards that. They will gravitate towards the ease. Mind you, we also have to be prepared for difficult and anger and frustration, because lots of people are still experiencing frustrations within the systems that we work with, whether we are in a provincial healthcare system, whether we're at the federal level or at the private practice level. You know, I mean, like, people still experience those things, and you know, racism, um, colonialism, capitalism, fascism, all of those things. I mean, like, they're still present. But I mean, like, we can also buffer some of those, you know, by being in that space of, I'm here, I'm listening, I think is probably the better way to say it. Like, be present in that moment with that individual, because we don't know when we're going to see that individual again. So, you know, make it count. Really make it count, whether it's 20 minutes or 2 hours, make it count. Let that person know that, you know, like, you got them, that you're there for them, that they can call you. You may not have the answer, but you know what? Like, you're willing to look it up. Because remember, sometimes people don't have phones, they don't have internet access. They need to know how to get to their next appointment. Sometimes that's what decolonization looks like, because we forget that not everybody has a bus pass. But sometimes we need to be that bus pass to help people get to where they need to go. To me, that's my job, to help people get to their next step. And how do I help them do that? And I think it's important that we show up in that way.
Yeah, that's the being present and witnessing, and you know, showing up for each other, um and sometimes that requires us to go beyond our job description, and sometimes it goes beyond the standard day-to-day practices that are the norm in our offices or clinics or places of work, and that's required. We have to move beyond the issues we're facing now. The existential issues require us to just not step back, but to lean in. And just again, thanks folks for attending. We're almost at the end, and we'll have this recording available online as a reminder, and we have some resources that we're going to go through next. And we'll continue on. I believe this is yours. I believe your slide. Do you want to speak to this at all?
Is this my slide?
Maybe. I don't remember putting it in, but maybe I did.
I don't remember putting it in either. I think it's a great slide, but I really
Well, let's speak to it generally. So this is it looks like a decolonization, a survivor's perspective on Turtle Island. It could be one of my colleagues actually who have access to this, but you know, some of the key things I'm seeing here is your role is to support, and support has a clear definition. Amplify voices instead of speaking for Indigenous people. Transfer power and resources to Indigenous-led initiatives. Confront the colonial systems within our own workplaces and communities. You know, in social work practices, there's a lot of dominant norms that are colonial in their roots and in their practices. And it's, as Brooke said in the chat earlier, colonization isn't in his past, it's present. It's in the way we operate, relate, and the policies. So confront those systems, and then do the unglamorous work of implementing directives from Indigenous leadership. So often in this kind of work, we can consult with the intention of just getting approval. And when we're in relationship with folks, when we're committed to a longer term process in community, it's not about just consulting so we can put a stamp of approval. It's about co-creating and following the leadership of Indigenous people. And I fundamentally believe that to move forward, to address climate justice, to address the rise of fascism and authoritarianism, we have to be doing it with Indigenous leadership, because the conditions we're in now were created through the forces of white supremacy and settler colonialism. And we may not know what's on the other side of the systems we're currently in, but I believe that working in partnership and following Indigenous leadership will lead us to something better. It's unknowable currently, but I think it will lead us to something better. Wanted to share a couple other frameworks with you as well. This is the Ripples framework, which you'll have in the presentation, but it's a framework with policy development that explores, it's accessible online, it explores how to meaningfully engage with in partnership when you're thinking about health and social equity and policy, and from a decolonial approach. So really starts off with this idea of a water droplet of recognizing and representing Indigenous peoples. And the ripples that spill out from there are the interrupting and reimagining relationships, preparing agreements. So not just a contract, but what are the agreements? What are the ways we're going to show up with each other? What are the principles we're going to be holding? Practicing protocols, leveraging power, exerting community authority, and so leadership from the community, and then shifting social structures. It's a really interesting framework that was provided to me and gifted to me through my MSW experience, and I hope that you look into it. The ripples of meaningful involvement is offered as a framework to inform policy, research, and other decision-making processes with respect to how Indigenous peoples can be more meaningfully and influentially involved in a policy or decision-making process. Highly encourage you to check it out. There's some really great actionable steps in there. Another one that I really love is the Towards Braiding and the Towards Scarring series, and this is from Vanessa Andriotti and Elwood Jimmy, two Indigenous people who are part of the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures. This book is available online, and it represents this idea that settler colonial ways of knowing and being are, used through the analogy of bricks, where Indigenous ways of knowing and being are represented through the analogy of threads. And so what can we construct together using threads and bricks, and the sentimentalities, the ideas, the worldviews of both? And it sounds maybe like a contradiction, like how can you build something with both thread and brick? Maybe it's possible. And what might that look like? And this book does a really wonderful job of being an accessible approach to these sort of ideas and concepts. It's not academic at all. And it's a really great read, a really great opportunity for like a work book club. So if you have other people who want to engage in these ideas, this is a wonderful resource. Probably not going to do a Q&A because we are over time, and we have some conversations through the chat. We've been answering questions as we went. But I do want to point people to our evaluation. I did put the link in the chat. It also will go out in the email follow-up. But there's a QR code here as well that you can use to access the evaluation. It is helpful for us. You can provide feedback on this session. You can also provide feedback on the PD program, and also give us some insight into the work of the college and more generally. So it's a great way to be in collaboration and communication with us. Encourage folks as well. We won't do this right now, but as you're leaving today, maybe just put a little note in the chat about what you've taken away from this conversation. What's an idea or a thing that you can take with you into your practice, or anything else that'll help you close out your session? Because really in this work and these cards from Margot Feldman, our work is about, imagining new possibilities through our direct practice. We're dreaming of just futures, and we're doing it through our working community. Also want to just invite you folks to engage with Brenda's work at Gear's Indigenous Counseling. So Brenda does work at Eskasoni a couple days a week, but also is a clinical specialist and has her own practice and does some consulting as well. So you can work with Brenda directly. Highly encourage that you do. I love working with her. She is a wonderful person to be in relationship with. And I'm so grateful, Brenda, that you were here today. I'm grateful for Angeline and Heather and for Patricia and their wisdom and their voices being carried through this session. Yeah, Brenda, is there anything you want to say about your business?
No. Well, I will, but it's more about Sedna, the woman here, it's just the relatedness of the interrelatedness, the interconnectedness, and importance of the land and the waterways for Indigenous folk. And this is one of the ways that Inuit people do it, through the creation of Sedna, the legend of Sedna, and all the animals and how they feed us, and how humility is also very much a part of our culture, or our cultures, I should say. And so I just wanted to say thank you very much, everybody, for being here. yeah, I hope to see you again. You have any questions about what I do? If you'd like to just connect sometime, please, I feel free through the website or through the email, and I'll be more than glad to get back to you and see how we can see how I can be helpful. So I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you again for joining. Take good care.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. I'll just point to one more thing here and just say we have lots of things coming up with the college. So look to the newsletter, to our Eventbrite, to our social media feeds to see some of our upcoming events. And just a reminder, renewals are now open. So if you're a social worker on this call, please give a gift to yourself to complete your renewals early so you don't have to worry about them on January 31st or over the holiday break if you celebrate over the winter break. Yeah, so you can go in there and complete them now. And I say these words and I will not follow my own advice. I will probably forget about it until January, even though I work here. But hopefully I will do it earlier. And yeah, thank you folks. I've seen some messages in the chat here. Incredible and powerful learning opportunity today. So much to learn, great opportunity to learn, lots to reflect on. Wonderful training. Thank you for the reflections. Thank you so much. Thank you for this insightful learning. Yeah, so just really grateful for the folks who stuck around as well, knowing that, you know, this took definitely longer than we had planned, but that's part of working in this way, you know, being open to what happens and following the energy. Thank you. Brenda, have you seen some of the things in the chat?
Yes, I want to read them again because I didn't expect this. And I'm kind of like, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be sure to download them too and send them to you as well, because I'll get a copy of the chat. So I'll send you a copy of them because there's some lovely feedback in here about your work and your approach.
Yeah, it's a little crazy actually when I look at this. Thank you. Thank you.
With that, I'll stop recording.